Here's my Hitch Hiker modified, but with the normal carabiner. And I notice with the carabiner I get quite a bit of movement. There's quite a bit of movement for tending. It moves from side to side. And the friction that I get sometimes on the climbing line seems rather inconsistent depending on the angle of the carabiner. What I've done is taken and replaced the carabiner, in this case, with a large wide D oval shackle. I think it's rated at about 16 or 20,000 pounds. It's a very heavy duty shackle. And now there's much less movement with the shackle than with the carabiner. Makes it easier to tend, and the friction against the climbing line doesn't vary because it is a perfectly round shaft on the shackle. When it comes to tending the shackle, I have put my swivel under the shackle. That way I don't have to unscrew the shackle if I'm disconnecting from the climbing system. Makes it very easy to get in and out. And also I can then take my over the neck my elastic neck lanyard and clip that to the swivel and tend the whole system. Or you could put an over the shoulder type lanyard or whatever system you have to tend that shackle, but it seems to tend very well on the ascent with little friction against the climbing line with that large shackle. One modification that I did make was that I removed the round-headed Allen screw and replaced it with a flat-head Allen screw. This allows the shackle free movement on this wide D heavy-duty shackle. It has less clearance than some of the other shackles. And I don't think that the small amount of material that I removed from the Hitch Hiker has much effect on the overall strength rating. This is one setup I used. It has the SRT line on the left there and the DdRT line on the right with a hitch climber pulley, and it's pretty easy to set up with a V-rig and use with a foot ascender. In this configuration, let's say you've ascended the tree SRT and now you're desiring to work DdRT and better positioning. In this example, I've used the large shackle and a smaller shackle attached to the backbone of the Hitch Hiker and a swivel. Now, when you ascended SRT, the climbing line would have been engaged on the other side of the shackle, and once you've come up the tree SRT, the change that must be made is attaching to the Hitch Hiker here, but also disengaging the climbing line from this lower slot so that that friction is bypassed. If you don't bypass this slot, then you'll have too much friction DdRT, because basically you're getting about 70% friction from this lower slot that is a constant variable and you can't adjust it. And once you've applied that 70% or more or less force of friction to the doubled line, you're basically applying 70% of the friction to 50% of the divided load, so it doesn't function. That's why you have to bypass, but it's similar to your rope wrench where once you disengage from SRT on your rope wrench, you've taken that rope wrench out and you can work DdRT. So it's very similar to the configuration change that you would make on your rope wrench, removing the rope wrench once you've ascended and you want to go to DdRT. Now, one alternative to this example is if I were using this smaller shackle rather than the large shackle. The smaller shackle, as in some of my other videos you've seen, allows you to put a pinto pulley or a hitch climber pulley on here and have this tend much better. This still tends okay, but not nearly as well as when you have a pulley in that position. But basically you have pretty even, nice positioning that you can do from both sides of the climbing line. And this is 154 pounds suspended from the line, and very easily, if you needed the mechanical advantage, it's very simple to install a Prusik, your hand ascender with a revolver, your Prusik with a pulley, and once you have set it up in this configuration, you're now working with a 4-to-1 mechanical advantage if you need the extra strength to get someplace. And you can do that on both sides, obviously. If you wanted to work with a 4-to-1 on this side or your regular 2-to-1. But it makes a pretty nice changeover to a V-rig using the Hitch Hiker. Just to point out again the difference, whether you use a Carabiner or whether you use the Shackle, in order to use this DdRT, this climbing line must bypass the lower friction slot. As you can see, I've released all of the friction on my hitch and nothing is going to descend because I'm basically getting about 70% of the friction from this lower slot, and it's being applied to 50% of the load, not allowing the hitch hiker to descend. The way that I have to do this is disengage the carabiner or the shackle, just like you would have to do with a rope wrench, and then you're going to get just the friction from the dog bone and your climbing hitch. Here's another option. I used a smaller shackle, still rated at over 8,000 pounds, but it's a wider shackle than that heavy duty shackle, and it allows you to have a little extra space in which you can install a tether. In this case, I've bent some wire and welded washers to the end and dipped it in plastic dip. This is another tending option that I used when I was using the carabiner, but it can also fit in this smaller shackle, wider but smaller, but it's basically just heavy gauge copper wire bent in such a way that it fits around and tends the shackle, and I just dipped it in plastic dip. This one is using the pinto pulley with a smaller shackle and the bent copper for the tether. Worked pretty well. Tends nicely. one issue on the shackle is the width of that eye. When you buy a shackle, the width of that eye has to be small enough that it can fit through the holes on either the pintle pulley or the hitch climber pulley. Here's a V-rig setup and a regular hitch climber pulley on the one side. I've used two different climbing lines for my own convenience, but you can see where I've bypassed the line on the lower shackle, and now I have the friction from the dog bone and the hitch. The dog bone provides a certain percentage of the friction and makes it smooth, but you do have to make sure that you bypass that lower slot or And here's a setup for an M-rig configuration. Once again, notice that the Carabiner bypasses the climbing line, allowing it to work as a DdRT. This is just a thought when installing the shackle. It probably is not that important. I think if you tighten the shackle down with a wrench or even put a safety wire on there, it's not going to come loose. But when you install the shackle, it seems like it's probably best to install it from the right to the left as you're looking at the spline. That way, when the friction is applied to the shackle on your descent, if there is any tendency, the tendency would be to tighten the shackle rather than to loosen it.
Alright, plus Shackle and changes a Hitch Hiker figure and use it with pulley. Really, if you were doing if start as timing, it tells and then I use a lanyard user. Go use it in V-rig. I'll use the other V-rig. There, I'm ready to go. I put this just in this and still have one. Or if it was that, if the RT, I set up the other climb DD, use shack through the bone of the hiker, and take this, I do take shackle and change until the shackle is on the I don't get friction the shackle or carabiner using it. So now here you go, D and V and the action